Good morning, everybody. Good morning, people on the radio. Good morning, people on YouTube and wherever it is that you're tuning in. Maybe even on the app. Oh, there is an app out there. I know, it's there. So welcome to the original Loretta Brown Show, radio to open the heart, heal the soul, and awaken the consciousness. We're almost to May. In a couple of days, Benny, it will be May Day. May Day.
I know. I'm looking so forward to it. April just screamed on by, didn't it?
It did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff going on. But anyway, so I hope you're enjoying life and life's going to be good. And May is coming, and I'll tell you about that in just a second. Like I said, I'm the owner of Reiki Oasis, located right here in the greater Seattle area for the last 26, 27 years. And as everybody knows, I've gone to Zoom for a lot of things. So it's actually kind of expanded my clientele base. And I do have people all over the world that call in to me, and I do a lot of work. People are like, Loretta, what do you do long distance? I do everything except clean your house. I don't do that. But it's really easy to connect with people. I've always done it, as a channel and a reader. I've always done it long distance. We can do Reiki long distance. We can do sound long distance, past life regression work, spiritual counseling, whatever it is you need to do. So find out more about me at ReikiOasis.com. Sign up for everything at schedule.ReikiOasis.com. And a big shout out to Indigo Hawk. I haven't thanked him for a while, my webmaster, who does things technologically. And we are working on some things to kind of, spice it up this year. Every Sunday at 11 a.m., I offer a meditation. It's called Sunday Meditation with Loretta. And you can join us. It's at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. If you can't be there at that time, sign up and I will send you a recording. Everybody gets a recording. And it's really just a check-in to help kind of reset you. I have a great guest today, so I'm going to do just a very quick astrological check-in for those people that love to know the weather. May 2021 is actually a huge month astrologically. Jupiter enters Pisces for the first time in 12 years. Mercury and Saturn go retrograde, and the eclipse season starts with a rare blood moon total lunar eclipse in Sagittarius. I feel like I have to wipe my forehead just saying that. The Pleiades portal opens, and the icing on the cake is that we have a record number of what are called out of bounds planets. They've gone out of bounds. Mercury, Venus, Mars, and the moon will all be out of bounds, with Mercury and Mars. Mercury, planet of communication, and Mars is that sort of fiery person. They'll be out of bounds for almost the entire month. And if you're not familiar with that, it just means the planets are in a certain location in the sky, either north or south of the equator. But when a planet is out of bounds of the sun, it doesn't have to follow the rules. Oh no, which means it can do pretty much whatever it wants. Planets rarely go out of bounds, and we can have months on end where everybody's playing by the rules. But in May, we have 4 planets that are just going to kind of do what they want. So be prepared for some unexpected things, maybe some opening of things. Because if we're suddenly in a place on our planet where we're kind of trying to do things differently, we're breaking out of the rules, sometimes what we find is that there are new ways of doing things. And there are some things we could do in different ways, right? It's always that way. So we're going to get kind of this sense of freedom, or kind of an invitation to take a look at, well, what do we want to do and how do we want to do it? So hang on a little bit. We are up for a ride. But whenever there's a challenge, there's always the opportunity to grow into that. So a lot of energy in May. I'll talk more about that next week when we actually get into it. But I want to bring my guest on because I love the subject matter for today. If you've ever wondered about past lives, if you've heard of Edgar Cayce, if you've wondered how do past lives affect our current lives, you're going to really enjoy my show today, because I have Joanne DiMaggio, M-A-C-H-T, on my show. And this is actually at least the second time she's been on my show. I loved our other interview. She's a wealth of information. Joanne has been actively involved with Edgar Cayce's Association for Research and Enlightenment since 1987. Joanne is a regression specialist. She'll tell us what that is, a lecturer, and the author of numerous books to include her latest book, Edgar Cayce and the Unfulfilled Destiny of Thomas Jefferson, Reborn. This is the true and endearing story of the relationship between Edgar Cayce, one of the most documented and famous renowned psychics of the 20th century, and Thomas Jefferson, also known as TJ Davis, the nephew of Cayce's secretary, Gladys Davis. Joanne DiMaggio shares this amazing story of past lives, present influences, and how they can affect history and even the life of a soul. And, welcome to the show, Joanne. I'm just so thrilled to have you. I have 80 million questions.
Thanks, Loretta. I'm really happy to be here with you again.
So I'm really curious. I want to lay a little bit of groundwork. Could you just kind of review with the audience about Edgar Cayce, who he is and what he did? And I have to just say this before you launch in. I had a father who was always reading this stuff, and I actually was introduced to Edgar Cayce by my father, who told me if I put the books I was studying under my pillow, like Edgar Cayce, I'd know everything by the time. It didn't actually work for me. Joanne, help me.
Yeah, it worked for Edgar. I don't know about anybody else. Yeah,
funny.
matter of fact, there's a funny story about that, because when TJ was a little boy, he would go in the vault where all the bags of mail to Mr. Cayce were kept till he could get to them. And his, as you mentioned, TJ's aunt was Gladys Davis, who's Edgar's secretary, and TJ used to fall asleep on the bags of mail. And Edgar came in there one time and he said to him, well, you can go ahead and sleep on them all you want. You won't really know what's in them the way I do. So it's like, it was kind of a family joke, I guess. I don't know. But to answer your question about Mr. Cayce, he was with us. He was, I think his dates are 1877 to 1945, he passed. And in that time, he was a very religious man. He read the Bible for every year of his life, taught Sunday school. And I won't go into all the details about how his special abilities came about, but needless to say, in the course of his lifetime, he gave 14,000 plus readings to people. And the majority of those, like 12,000 of them, were health readings. Because that's how he got the name of being the father of holistic medicine, because he would go into a trance and he would tell people what was kind of going on with them. Many people came to him because they had exhausted traditional medical advice, and he would prescribe a remedy. And many of those remedies are still available today. He was way ahead of his time in that regard. But then he started to get more esoteric readings were coming through. And that's when the past life information started to come out that he was sharing with clients. And there was about 2,000 of those life readings, they were called, in which he would tell people about who they had been in a prior lifetime and whether their soul gained or lost in that life, and tie it in with what was kind of going on with them today. So it's the life readings that I've studied and have incorporated the information that came through those readings into my work, because I've been a Cayce follower now, or he's been my mentor since 1987. So I've really, I resonate with everything that he said. He was the most famous and most renowned psychic and I don't even like to use the word psychic, because I think he was more a prophet than anything else, of the 20th century. So yeah, that's who he was, and he founded the Association for Research and Enlightenment and Atlantic University in 1931. And I ended up getting my master's at Atlantic University in transpersonal studies. And so it was 3 of the best years of my life to be with like-minded people and to study this work. So,
you know, I am actually just fascinated by Edgar Cayce and everything that he did, and I hope many people listening have heard of him and will go check out, you know, all of his information. But he would basically go to sleep,
right.
And then this information would just come out. And I've always wondered, and you may or may not be able to answer, like where he went to get that information, right? Because he would, yeah,
he would either go to Akashic Records and read the record, or he would go directly to source and get the information. He worked where you asked him a question. So he was lying there apparently looking like he was asleep, and then this information was coming through him. So he had to answer a question. It wasn't like he just started to talk on whatever subject he wanted. He was waiting for the question. So, and there's a description of the process that he went through to get to where he went, which is very fascinating unto itself. But I don't think anybody since him has been able to do that.
No, I actually haven't heard of anyone else that does that. I'm also being with how well documented everything was.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So in the writing of this book, you accessed all kinds of information. I'm showing people on the YouTube, the book, right? Edgar Cayce and the Unfulfilled Destiny of Thomas Jefferson, Reborn, which really the title itself raises all kinds of issues, right?
Yes, you're right, right.
So how did you get into doing this book?
Well, in 1987, after Shirley MacLaine's Out on a Limb came out as a miniseries, some of your listeners and viewers may know about that. That was my big wake-up call, because I had studied reincarnation. I'd read books when I was a teenager about Edgar Cayce and, you know, people like Jess Stern and Ruth Montgomery. I was reading their books and stuff. And I think the first book I read on reincarnation was The Search for Bridie Murphy. And that's really long ago.
Okay. I just have to interject this. Okay, so my dad again, and when I grew up, we had a mule named it Bridie Murphy. And it took me years and years to figure out where that name came from. Thank you for that.
Please, there you go.
That's hysterical. You know, there's always this weird connection between people.
You never know, right?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, please continue.
So, so that same year, I decided I wanted to really devote my time and energy into the study of reincarnation issues. And because Shirley had talked about that in her book and also in that miniseries. And so I thought, well, where can I go? I mean, where are the like-minded people that I can learn from? And that took me to the ARE, and I joined that year. And then I had a friend who said to me, did you know that Edgar Cayce did this reading on this baby boy when he was 2 days old, and said that he had been the reincarnation of Thomas Jefferson and Alexander the Great, not just Thomas Jefferson. He had 2 famous past lives. And she knew that I loved history. I was a history major in college. And she also knew that I was a writer. And I likened myself to a reporter for the universe. So when I would hear about a great lead for a story, it was like my antenna went up, and I thought, wow, I want to find out, what is it like to get a reading like that when you're 2 days old? How did that affect your life? Obviously, I knew that he had not fulfilled that prophecy. The prophecy was, by the way, in that same reading, Cayce said, this soul could do for the world what Thomas Jefferson did for this country. Heavy. So I thought, okay, I know he didn't do that. And why not? What happened? Because I knew Cayce. I don't know of any time Cayce was wrong about any of the readings that he did. Yeah. So I thought he wouldn't have said that unless he knew something. So it took me, I tried to get in touch with ARE. I said, can you connect me with this? Because at that point, I didn't even know his name. I only knew he was number 1208, because in the Cayce readings, everybody's given a number to preserve anonymity. So I didn't even know what his name was. But I found people who did. They shared that with me, and but they wouldn't introduce us. They said, no, you don't want to meet him. No, nope, 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 nope. So one obstacle after the other. So finally I gave up. And this was in 1987. I moved to Charlottesville in 1995. And unbeknownst to me, he had also moved to Charlottesville from Virginia Beach with his family. And so we got connected through somebody at the University of Virginia who was a past life therapist. And I had called him because I wanted to get to know, are you doing any study groups or anything like that in Charlottesville? And he mentioned me to this woman, a nurse at the hospital. And she called me and she said, my husband, TJ Davis, and I would like to invite you to our home for dinner. And I was like, what? The universe had divinely orchestrated this meeting. So we met, and in that first meeting, he told me that Cayce had said he had been Jefferson, and we became friends. And then our lives kind of went in different directions, and I didn't see him for years. And then all of a sudden we came back together again. And I asked him, would you be interested in me writing your biography? And also because I felt like he had been given a bad rap, because people were blaming him for not having fulfilled that prophecy. Like, oh, you could have done for all of us this great thing and you just didn't do it. But nobody was asking why he didn't do it. And that's what I wanted to find out. So he agreed. And so I started hosting him for small conversations with local ARE people here in the Charlottesville area. And then he gave me permission to go into his file at the Edgar Cayce Foundation, the archives. And luckily for me, Karen Davis, who is his cousin through marriage, was working in the archives, and she assisted me by giving me she'd go in the archives and pull out a folder, and I had to put my white gloves on and very gingerly go through one page at a time. And over an 8-year period, this book evolved, and it went through many, many rewrites and interviews with TJ. And finally, in March, it got published. So I'm really proud of it. It's my first biography. Yeah.
Yeah. And just like I said, I'm going to show it to people, and I'm the tabby girl height.
Oh, good.
But I also love the fact you've got pictures in it, like your research, like you've got letters between people. There's all kinds of information in here that I don't know, in my opinion, if anybody was to question anything, you have something to stand on with what you've got in the book.
That's exactly why I did it the way I did it, because when Karen Davis and I were talking about it, she said, Joanne, make sure that the book includes the historic documentation. And so what I did was I went through everybody's file, Mr. Cayce, Gladys, his parents, and read all the letters, because back then that's how they would send letters all the time back and forth. And I just sandwiched them together to create some sort of a chronological map so the first part is all based on historic documentation. So if anybody points to anything and says, that's not true, I can go to the archives and show that it is. And then the second part of the book is his memories of growing up in the Cayce household.
You know, I'm sitting here thinking of several things. Number one, sort of the guidance that came to you, like there was like a behind the scenes orchestration of you and TJ coming together, and this book actually getting out there, which is probably a whole lot of questions around that. Yeah. But because that's obvious, right? Like that's just obvious. But I want to back up just a little bit so that the listeners can understand, you know, so here is this 2-day-old baby getting a live reading from Edgar Cayce. So, and it's heavy, it's big. Yeah. And I'm with you, like Edgar Cayce to me was just like, didn't make mistakes. He didn't make any mistakes. what was going on with that baby that he ended up there with Edgar Cayce? And maybe you can talk to this, because I could feel it through the whole book, this strong heart connection between Edgar Cayce and TJ. Like there's something going on here.
Absolutely. TJ is part of Cayce's soul group. So the soul family, we traveled together as soul families, soul groups, like pods, from one lifetime to the other. And TJ was part of that pod that Cayce was in and Gladys was in. And he knew he wanted to be in Cayce's life. But by the time he looked in on Cayce, he was already too old to have children. And then he thought, well, I'll come in through my Aunt Gladys and get to Cayce. And he couldn't do that because she wasn't married or having children. So then he thought, well, okay, I'll come in through Gladys's brother, Boyd, and his wife, Berlin. They won't want me because they're gamblers and alcoholics. The last thing they wanted was a baby. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. He came in through them, through his biological parents. And when he was born, he said that he looked like a piece of wood because he had been sloshing around in a womb that was nothing but alcohol. Oh. And the doctor said, he has maybe 3 days to live. And so Mr. Cayce knew this already. And he told Gladys, he'll be fine, bring him to me. Gladys wrapped the baby up, brought him to Mr. Cayce. Cayce gave him a health reading, and Gladys followed it. The baby was fine. But then that life reading came at the same time, basically. And that was, Cayce did many health readings for TJ over his life, because TJ was 8.5 when Mr. Cayce died. So those first 8.5 years he spent on and off in the Cayce household because Gladys would be his caretaker. And so he had a very special bond with Edgar. And yeah, if you just look at the pictures alone, you could see how much love there's a lot of love in that cover picture.
Yes.
And
little.
Yeah, when he was just a baby.
Yeah.
He adored, they were very, very, very close. And Edgar saw something in him that, and he nurtured that. And he was like his teacher, I have stories in there about how they'd go out on the pier and go fishing together. And Cayce was pouring all this information and wisdom into the vessel of this little boy, and the things that TJ saw growing up there were just remarkable. So, he found his way back to his mentor and his teacher. And those years, those 8.5 years, he was just it was just the most happy time for him. And Cayce, gave really explicit directions to his parents about how he was to be raised. They opted to not listen to that. And his soul ended up going on a completely different trajectory than what Cayce had predicted. And I think it just shows that free will, we all have free will, and you can have the most lofty past life, but you could choose not to, you could choose to go in a whole different direction. I mean, he couldn't choose when he was 8.5 when Cayce died. Certainly he could have maybe done something later on in life when he was on his own. But those pivotal years were missed because the parents chose not to follow the directions that Cayce gave.
You pull out in the book something about a school. Edgar had chosen a school for TJ to go to, and can you make a comment about that?
Sure. Cayce had given a reading on a woman. Her name is Beulah Emmett, and she had been her past life, she had been with Aristotle and was like an assistant teacher or teacher with Aristotle. Well, Aristotle taught Alexander the Great. So TJ having been Alexander, Cayce's thinking, well, if I can get TJ back with his original teachers, right?
Right.
Pick up kind of where we left off. And Mrs. Emmett was starting a new school in New Hampshire called the High Mowing School, which was the first Waldorf school in the country. And so, although it was a high school, she agreed with Edgar. Asked her, "Would you take TJ?" And when she found out who he was and everything, yeah, I'll take him. She was ready to take him when TJ was only 6 years old.
Wow.
And they actually had him. Gladys had booked their ticket, the train tickets. She gave the itinerary to Mrs. Emmett. They were all set to go. And right when they're ready to get on the train, what do you think? TJ's mother changes her mind and pulls him off. And that was the end of that. And Mrs. Emmett said that to her, it was tragic that he didn't end up there. And Cayce was so disappointed. You could read the sense of disappointment in his letters to Mrs. Emmett about why this didn't happen. But he couldn't control that. He wasn't his father,
Right.
So,
right.
And he kept saying, I don't know why she changed her mind. I don't know what happened, but it's a shame. And he held out hope that later on he would still go to that school, but it never happened.
It never happened. Yeah. I was actually just going to ask, why did she change her mind? But we may never know. Yeah.
Well, she claimed that she didn't want him so far from her. But if you ask TJ, and I have a quote in the book from TJ, that he thinks it was ridiculous because she really didn't, she didn't want him in the first place. So why is she coming up with this? I don't want him far away from me. I mean, they spent large periods of time not together. So it was just one of those things that I guess that we'll never know what the motive was behind that.
Yeah, we may never know.
It's a shame. Yeah.
So this is Loretta Brown, my guest today, Joanne DiMaggio. We're talking about her book, Edgar Cayce and the Unfulfilled Destiny of Thomas Jefferson, Reborn, which I think raises all kinds of issues about karma, free will choice, and what happens when a soul is doing great things and then comes in, and are they always going to continue to do great things? How are your past lives affecting current life? So we're going to take a little station break. And don't go away, because when we get back, I have a lot more questions. Things such as, is there just one soul in one life? Why are there so many Cleopatras? So we'll answer that question when we get back. Let's take a little station break, Benny.
Okay, ladies, all clear and still live on YouTube.
Thank you. I just, I'm thinking to myself, your book really did raise questions for me about, because people have asked me before, have I missed my destiny, right? Have I missed it? And I've had a tendency to say, well, your path is what it is. But there are a lot of factors. So when a soul comes in, because you've done a lot of past life regression work with people, right?
Right, I still do.
When a soul comes in and in the work that you've done, you've run across other people who have kind of missed the mark, so to speak.
Well, I know I don't look at it that way. I think that, we plan our life out in that pre-life planning session. When we're in the afterlife, we take a look at a particular past life that we have some karmic issues and we want to bring them into the next life, because the next life would be perfect to work on them. And so we actually do this planning where we pick our parents and our members of our soul family decide to come in with us. We know what our soul's mission is and all of that. So depending on what his karmic issues were, and he has many, and he'll admit it to you that he's going to be coming back quite a few more times, as we all are, that you work on those. And so one of the things that I think, what's fascinating about him is that he doesn't really talk about Jefferson or Alexander. That's never been in the forefront of his mind. Things have happened to him that have come up that reminds him of that, but it's the Cayce connection that's most important to him.
Yeah. I really got that, because, oh goodness, if I was thinking, because I'm a mom, if I had a child and at 2 days old was given a reading like that.
Let me know when you're ready to come back. Sorry.
Oh yeah, we're ready anytime. Okay. Yeah. Welcome back to the original Loretta Brown Show. And I'm Loretta Brown. Who knew? Yeah, totally. And my guest today, Joanne DiMaggio, a delightful woman. She's written a great book called Edgar Cayce and the Unfulfilled Destiny of Thomas Jefferson, Reborn. We're talking about past life and current life and how they affect each other, and also about free will and karma. And I asked a question just before the break. So why are there, quote, so many Cleopatras, Joanne? Because I know you do a lot of past life regression work, and I get this all the time where people are like, there's a theory called, I think it's called the split soul or something like that, where a soul comes back in many lives. Do you believe that? What do you believe?
I don't believe that. I believe it's one soul to one body. Cayce believed one soul to one body. I have living in Charlottesville, Virginia, which is the home of Thomas Jefferson, by the way. So his home is here. It's Monticello is here. The University of Virginia, which he founded, is here. Consequently, we have many souls here who think they were Thomas Jefferson.
Thank you.
And when my book was published, one in particular sent me an email and said I had done a great disservice to humanity by writing this book because I was not acknowledging that there were other Thomas Jeffersons here. Well, I don't believe there were other Thomas Jeffersons here. I have asked people before, I said, if you think you're somebody famous, I mean, when you were doing the regression, are you looking out through your eyes at the people? Or are you seeing this famous person, like if you think you're Napoleon, do you see him on the horse? Because famous people attracted a lot of other people who were in their circle, right? So you would identify maybe with them, but that doesn't mean that that's who you were. Here we have a child who, in TJ's case, when he's 3 years old, he's reciting the Declaration of Independence to Edgar and telling him that he wrote it. So, I mean, how many of these other Thomas Jeffersons can say that? I don't know. So people come up with reasons. I had one woman who said to me, she said, I think I was Patrick Henry in a previous life. And I said, oh, really? Why do you think that? She said, because he's a good talker and so am I.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So sometimes, there's a lot more to it than that. And most people who were truly, truly somebody famous are the most humble people on the earth. They don't go around bragging about, I was so-and-so or I was so-and-so. I just read something this morning about a woman who thinks she's Mary, the mother of Jesus. And I don't negate what anybody's truth is or what their experience is, but there's a lot more to it than I think that they're not really exploring. Right. So I never say to somebody, you cannot have been that person. But there are theories of strands of soul, like a soul will split and different strands will go into different bodies. Then my question is, well, which of those strands is handling the karma from that life, right?
Very
With
well
Jefferson,
said.
He had some karma because of slavery. So you've got the slave owner and you've got the writer of the Declaration of Independence. Which strand goes into which body and how are they dealing with that karma? So, I think a lot of those statements are ego-based. And so I'm not really into famous people of famous past lives,
Yeah.
Like I said, TJ is very humble and very seldom talks about Jefferson and very seldom talks about Alexander. Matter of fact, he does not like Alexander. He says, I don't know why they said he's the great. He says, he's not great at all. Look at all the people he killed, So, so anyway, but I think he's never had a regression. I've offered to regress him multiple times and he has always refused. But he'll say something out of the blue where you just know that it's coming from that lifetime. So I do believe that he is the real deal.
He's the real deal. Yeah. I actually, I'm going to agree with you on everything that you said, and there's a lot more we could say about that. But I suppose I've got a couple of questions, and then I want to get back into the book. you do a lot of past life regression work with people. So what is different about the way you do it as opposed to what Edgar Cayce did?
Well, Edgar Cayce was doing a reading. In other words,
Right.
he was going to source or Akashic records, and then he was telling people who they were. I don't ever do that. I don't do readings. I guide them. I use guided imagery, and I help them get into, because the answers are all there for them. All that information is stored in their soul. They just have to be open-minded to it and just ask for the information to come forward, and the soul very gladly accommodate them. So I guide them through a very long induction, relaxation, deep breathing kind of thing. And then I guide them into this past life. But everything that they come up with is something they saw, not something I projected onto them. So that's the main difference. And then I try to help them tie it together. You know, what do you have in common with this past life? Are there any people from that life that are in your life now? Can you tell from the essence of their soul? And if they are in your life now, what role are they playing? You know, and what do you know? What were your last thoughts when you passed away, when your soul left your body? Because that often sets up the next life. So having a trained regression therapist working with you is different than going to a reader.
Yes.
Who will just, you know, psychically tell you who you had been.
Yeah, and I also, you know, because I do some past life regression work too, I find that, and even in all the work that I do, I find that when the person has a personal experience, like when it comes out of their soul to them, they'll have goosebumps or cry, or there's something that validates. Yeah. Whereas sometimes when you just tell people something, they're like, oh, well, that's lovely, but I don't know. Right. So for TJ, you know, because he had this reading when he was 2 days old. He's still alive, right?
Oh, yes, he is.
Yeah.
He'll be 85 in June.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's amazing. That kind of gives me goosebumps. Like, yeah, it would be really fun to meet him. Yeah, that would be great.
He still lives in Charlottesville. Yeah. And actually he lives on this very remote area, but his mountain, when he was first moved there, he could go to the top because he's got like 40 acres. He can go to the top with binoculars and look over at the next mountain. And guess what was on the next mountain? Monticello, his old home. So he used to say, I see all these people running around in my house.
That's great.
And there have been times he's gone up there, and it's those stories are funny as well when he's actually visited his old home. But
so when he was a boy, he spent so much time with Edgar Cayce. I'm going to say he basically was raised by him in some manner.
Yeah.
And you know, from the book, I understand they had all kinds of interesting conversations, and Edgar Cayce even helped develop a friend for him when they were out on the pier. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, that pier, there was a lake behind the Cayce household, and there was a pier there that Edgar would go out and fish. And when TJ was about 2 and could hold a rod, he went out there as well. And there's the cutest pictures of the two of them sitting there. There's one in the book, fishing. And that was TJ's classroom. That's where Mr. Cayce taught him about reincarnation, about the creation story, about karma. He taught him how to read auras. And so TJ, being just a little fellow, would say, you know, there were all adults at the ARE at that point. They'd come and visit Mr. Cayce. And TJ said, there's nobody here my size. He never talked about age. He always talked about this size. And so Mr. Cayce said, don't worry about it. You're here with me now. But he kept whining about it. So finally one day they're out on the pier, and TJ says he hears violin playing, you know, in the background. And he turns around, here's this little girl playing the violin. Mr. Cayce said, there you go. There's a playmate for you. Her name is Stefanella, and she'll play with you. So TJ started playing with her. She only spoke Italian. And TJ said sometimes when she was playing her violin, she was so into it that she was almost like he could put his hands through her. But for TJ, this was like normal stuff, right? Because he was living with this man, and all these things were going on. So and she was TJ's companion until Mr. Cayce died. And then there's an interesting story in the book about years and years later, when after TJ got out of the Marine Corps, he started traveling around Europe, ended up in Italy, in Perugia, decided to go to the university there on the GI Bill, went to find a place to live, and meets this woman who says she had a room for him. And so she goes in the kitchen to make some coffee. He's looking around, and on the piano, there's all these pictures. And what do you know? There's a picture of, guess who? Stefanella. And he was like, what's going on here? Turns out that she was the mother or grandmother of this woman. So there's a whole story in the book about that. I thought that was incredible.
I think that's incredible. It's really, really incredible. It also brings to the forefront of my mind that Edgar Cayce knew about TJ maybe even before he came in. There's this whole, and I understand too that when they were out there on the pier, they'd talk about, like, do you remember building the pyramids? And
exactly,
and they'd talk about Atlantis, and it was like memories. Right? Like they're just talking about old times together or something.
Yeah. And TJ said, if you overheard us talking, you think we were like 10,000 years old. He says, because we were, and he said, he talked to me like I was an adult.
Wow.
But what I have to say, and I want to make sure I get this in, is after I wrote the book and the book came out, I was really thinking about this whole heaviness of this prophecy about doing for the world what Jefferson did for this country. I don't think it had anything to do with Jefferson, and I don't think it had anything to do with any kind of a global initiative, or political. I think it was because when they were out on the pier, Mr. Cayce never talked about Thomas Jefferson. Right. He was teaching him, and when they were in the house, even TJ was reading. He'd go into the little library and he'd read the readings. They would bring the readings to him, and he'd sit there and read, or else he'd sit in on a reading. And I think Mr. Cayce, I think he intended for him to share the Cayce material, the teachings, and the readings with the world. Because TJ has often said to me, he said, Joanne, all the answers to humanity's problems are contained in those readings, if only people would ask. So if you have a person coming in who was Thomas Jefferson, first of all, people are going to sit up and pay attention to him, right? I wonder what he has to say. Let's listen. And then if he starts talking about karma or about reincarnation or about any of that stuff as the answer to humanity's issues, that's a whole different thing. And I really am hoping that this book and the times I can actually get him to speak with me at some of the conferences that I'm doing, which is not easy because he is like somewhat of a recluse, plus his health is starting to fail. But when I can get him to do that, I think he actually will fulfill that destiny. I really do feel that way.
Oh my goodness. Thank you for that, because I actually was going to ask that question in some form and you answered it. Yeah. I was thinking to myself that perhaps people's idea of that reading, because, okay, Thomas Jefferson and Alexander the Great are political figures, right? And I understand TJ also had other lifetimes that were something to do with political, whatever, right?
Right.
And definitely in our world today, we're undergoing some sort of transition with all of that. But maybe, my thought was maybe he is fulfilling his destiny. And part of that's because I have this unfounded trust in Edgar Cayce, right? That he knew what was going on. And, he spent 8.5 years with Edgar Cayce, which to me is rich and full, and my goodness, nobody did that, right?
Yeah, right.
And I guess I don't for a moment believe Edgar Cayce wasn't tuned into the fact that this was going to be part of the whole thing. Right?
I always felt when I was working on this book that both Edgar Cayce and Gladys Davis were with me, because there were times I'd get really frustrated. I'd put it down for months at a time. I didn't want to do it, or the obstacles were too great. I had people that didn't want me to write this book, and they would pop up, and then I'd say, okay, I won't do it. But I remembered that I had made a promise that I would do it in my pre-life planning session. And I feel like what's interesting to me about all this is that when I was going through those files, you know, they were falling apart in my hand because they would write letters to each other on and make, Gladys would do carbon copies on onion skin paper. Your older listeners will know what that is. But, you know, here we are 70 years later and the stuff's falling apart in my hand. And I felt like, I wonder if Edgar and Gladys put all this in the archives and nobody had bothered to go in there to pull it out and read it because they knew that in 70 years, the universe was going to send their cub reporter to go and do the research and write this story. I mean, that's how it felt to me, which is what kept me going, you know, through all of it. So, you know, I've taken some heat because of it, but I don't care because I felt like this was wrong. This was wrong that he had, you know, he never was able to get a job at the ARE, which was all he really ever wanted. Oh. He was happy to just cut the grass and they wouldn't give him a job. He did develop a reputation, you know, that was maybe less than, I don't know, you know, more like he was a womanizer and he was more like the hippie recluse that would just kind of hang out over there. But he was lost. After Cayce died, he was a lost soul. Cayce had promised him a second reading when he was 13. And he felt like that reading would have given him everything he needed to know going forward. And that reading never happened. Right. And he was trusting after Cayce died that maybe somebody there would take him under their wing and nurture him. And that didn't happen because everybody was scurrying around trying to save the readings. Gladys was busy doing that. She didn't really have time for him. And then he was thrown from pillar to post. You know, he would be sent to his grandmother's, then to his aunt and uncles. And he never really had the kind of stable home that he had when Cayce was alive. And so there was a lot going on there that I feel like people have ignored in terms of understanding what really happened. So instead of blaming him and shaming him, you know, for not having done what Cayce said, I think that they misunderstood what Cayce meant. And that's only, you know, come to the forefront now that the book is done and out there. So I'm hoping to set the record straight.
Well, and I'm also thinking to myself about, you know, so many other people and they're, like I was saying during the break, people ask me sometimes, Loretta, did I miss my destiny? You know, did I mess it up? Yeah. And maybe he didn't mess it up. Maybe it was misunderstood by people because I can feel that disappointment or that possible judgment or anger people may have directed toward him. And then he went from under Edgar Cayce's wing to just nothing.
Nothing,
you know, just
right.
No direction, nobody really wanting him and him having to try to find his way and all of that. Yeah. So I applaud you for continuing on and I do really feel that Edgar Cayce and Gladys probably, are right there helping you with that whole thing. So possibly our destiny, right? Like you say, maybe TJ's destiny is exactly what is happening right now with you releasing this book. And of course, we're also in a time where you're able to extend out now with, you know, sessions because of Zoom and because of what has happened this past year. And this book is getting, I think, hopefully more recognition and possibly turning people's eyes back toward the Edgar Cayce materials.
Yeah. Well, I hope so. Yeah, I do. Yeah.
So TJ has had to carry this rather complicated load with him his whole life.
Yeah. And he learned early on not to talk about it.
Okay.
So he would not share anything with anybody because he said that, you know, after Cayce died and he was kind of thrown out into the mainstream, he realized that other children's lives were not like his at all. And he didn't want people to think he had two heads or he was weird or, I mean, they would call him that psychic brat. he'd say that when Cayce was even alive, that when he would go visit friends from school or something like that, that the parents wouldn't even drop him off in front of the Cayce house because they were too spooked by it. So they drop him off a couple of blocks away, and he'd have to walk the rest of the way. So he knew from an early age that this was not mainstream conversation, and consequently, he didn't talk about it. And until he met me, and then because I was running ARE programs here in Charlottesville, I said, how about if I organize a small gathering when you can talk to people, tell them your story? And at first he didn't want to do it. He was afraid to do it.
Yeah.
And I said to him, you're going to be in loving company. These people are like-minded. They're not going to think anything ill of you or that you're weird. And he did. He started to do that. And people were hanging on his every word. They were mesmerized. He still has that charisma that you would associate with a Thomas Jefferson, right? He can still command a crowd. And people just hung on every word that he said. And it was actually funny because I was standing aside and watching this. He was like a rock star, and these were all little groupies around him. It was really actually kind of funny, but he was so relieved that he could be his authentic self again.
Yeah.
And then these people were loving to him. And I mean, I wish we could have kept that up longer than what we did, but
I'm thinking about the journey of a soul, from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime. And is he in tune with maybe where he's going to go after this lifetime? Is that information that comes through to a soul, or do we just wait until, the afterlife for that?
Well, they say you do set up your next lifetime in your current lifetime. But, you've got to factor in free will. And when he's in the afterlife, just as all of us, we're going to look and say, like, the earth is a school, right? And we're taking classes here. So you look at your report card of all your lifetimes to see what you haven't passed or what you haven't taken yet. And then you end up saying, okay, in this life, I'm going to work on issues of abandonment, or I'm going to work on issues of approval and acceptance, or whatever. So we don't know what he's going to do the next time. He knows he's coming back. He already said that.
Yeah.
And I will tell you that of everything about Jefferson's life, it is the slavery issue that bothers him the most. And so I don't know if that's what I think in this life, he's working on the monetary problems that Jefferson had, because he lives now in pretty much abject poverty. And he doesn't have a computer, he doesn't have Wi-Fi, he doesn't have a car. So he's kind of up there and depending on, people bringing food to him and stuff like that. So when I call him, he gets all charged up, because when he talks about Cayce, he lights up. It's like a whole different person. Wow. So I want to show him that there are still so many people who love him.
Yeah.
And who want the best for him and would do anything for him. So we're reintroducing him to his like-minded family.
Well, and maybe this is the right time for this information to come forward and for him to be here. I'm like I say, I'm looking at the strange meandering of his life and how it's ended up here. Do you recommend that children be told things like that?
No, neither does he. No.
Right.
Yeah. Because he said Gladys would read him his life reading like it was a bedtime story.
Oh, wow.
So he got it every single night. You ask him, about his Atlantean life, and he'll tell you about how he was part of the group that was destroying Atlantis, and then he fell in love with a soul that was on the other side, and he ended up rescuing like groups and taking them to settle in different parts of the world. So anyway, wow. It was no, he would not recommend that.
So one last question, and then let people know where they can find you. Are you part of his soul family,
Yeah,
Edgar Cayce's.
I
Yeah.
am. I didn't think I was until TJ told me. Because one time a medium said to me, you know why you're so attached to the Cayce material? And she said, because you had been his daughter in a life in Africa. And I said to TJ, I said, I've never been in Africa. I've never had a lifetime in Africa. And TJ says, Joanne, Egypt is in Africa. So I was like, okay,
That's
all
great.
right. Yeah.
Well, maybe we're related somehow. But anyway, this is Loretta Brown, my guest today, Joanne DiMaggio, Edgar Cayce, and the Unfulfilled Destiny of Thomas Jefferson, Reborn. I highly recommend it. Where can people find you, Joanne?
My website is joannedimaggio.com, JoanneDimaggio.com. And all my books are on there, the different kinds of regressions that I do. If anybody wants to book one on Zoom, they can book it right online. And there's a blog on there about different aspects of past life work that I think you might find interesting.
All right. Thank you so much. I loved it. We barely scratched the surface. And thank you so much. Blessings to you and to all the listeners. Have a really, really great week and enjoy May Day. Make it happy. Thank you so much, Joanne.
Thanks, Laura.
All right. All clear.